All right. I don't have my marker. Okay, smooth ER for number 2. What does the smooth ER do, Faith? Okay, who knows what the smooth ER does? Cam. Okay, one of its jobs is it gets rid of toxins. What else? Produces lipids. Synthesizes lipids, yes. Okay, breaks down complex carbohydrates and produces hormones. If they have any one of those 4 functions, they get the mark for the function. So 1 mark for smooth ER, 1 mark for any one of those 4 functions we listed. Okay? They don't get, if they listed all 4, they only get 1. It isn't a like 4 for 1 deal. Okay? All right. For number 4, what's the dark spot in the middle here called? Nucleolus. All right, got to have the 2 L's, nucleolus. And what does the nucleolus do? Garrett. That's the nucleus, has the DNA in it. The nucleolus, right, it copies the DNA to make RNA, controls protein synthesis. I would also accept as an answer. Okay, either one of those is fine. All right, what is number 5? No. No, I won't accept brain of cell. All right, I know someone somewhere along the way taught you brain of the cell. That's not a brain. Okay, it's not a brain. And it's not your fault. Someone's taught you it, and it's not right. Okay? All right. And it wasn't me, by the way, that taught you that. Okay. Number 5, what do we call the outside of the nucleus? Nuclear membrane. Okay. Okay, so nuclear membrane. And what does the nuclear membrane do? Well, essentially, what do all membranes do? All right, but not in it, not again. Okay. All right. What do all membranes do, guys? I don't like protect. Controls what goes in and out, or controls endo and exocytosis. Okay, something like that. Has to be regulates the entrance and exit, something like that. Okay, protects is far too general. All right, a term to get an answer for that. And we've never said protects it was good enough anywhere along. Okay, we've always said controls what gets in and out. Number 7. What would number 7 be, Michaela? Golgi apparatus. Okay, and what does the Golgi apparatus do, Bria? Okay, transports waste outside of the cell, gets rid of waste, I would accept. That was the answer? Yeah, okay. Hey, I also had someone in period 1 say, makes vesicles to contain materials for exocytosis, which was a beautiful answer. If anyone wrote that, that's also good for a mark. Okay. All right. Number 8. What are we looking at there? Nope. Cell membrane. Okay. All right, cell membrane, and the function of the cell membrane controls endo and exocytosis. All right. That is exactly what it says in your notes. Okay, controls endo and exocytosis. Today I will accept controls what gets in and out of the cell. All right, but in the future I am going to want those 2 technical terms, endocytosis and exocytosis. All right. What's number 9? Cassidy. This one. Mitochondria, right. All right, so the mitochondria, and Austin, what does the mitochondria do? Right, burns sugar for energy, breaks down sugar, okay, something along those lines. They do need to mention that it is the breaking down of sugar to release the energy. I've had a lot of people just say makes energy, but makes energy makes it sound like it's magic. Okay, you need to say something about how it does that. April, question. Nutrients is too general because some nutrients can't be made to use to make energy. So I can't. I gotta have to say no. We got to be specific here and say sugar. It has that, but that's not its function. No. What's that? Yes, if they have glucose, breaks down glucose for energy, yes, that would be fine. Doesn't make protein. No. Yeah. Okay. And then number 12, what are the stringy things? I'll accept 3 answers. Microfibers, microtubules, microfilaments, okay? So any of the micro things, okay? Microfilaments, okay, microfibers, okay, microtubules. And what do all of those do? Support of the cell, keeps the shape of the cell, prevents the cell from rupturing under twisting conditions, anything that basically has to do with support or shape will be an acceptable answer for that. All right, and number 11. Okay, well, those 2 things there, kind of gear-shaped. Centrioles, right. Okay, and what do centrioles do, Kian? They aid in cell division. Okay, if they said make sure DNA gets to the right side or something like that, that would also be fine. Okay, but they aid in cell division will be good enough. Okay, for the marks there. All right, out of 16, give them a mark out of 16. Let them see it. Put it in the box at the back, please. All right, before we get started on today's lesson, a couple of things we need to remind you about. Okay, cell anatomy lab, due Thursday. Okay, cell transport one that we did yesterday, due Friday. Make sure you got time to get those done here over the next few days. Remember that my classroom is always open at noon. If you need a place to work, I can provide you with a laptop to type it up if you need it. All right, but there's really no excuse to not have them done on time for Thursday and Friday. Please don't get them confused. Okay, the cell anatomy lab is the one that is due Thursday. That's the one with the lab diagrams. Cell transport is the one we did in class yesterday that isn't like a full lab. All right, the short one. So make sure you get them done on the right days. Everybody got me? Yeah. Okay. All right, so today, what we're going to go over is something I talked to you about earlier on in the unit where I said, don't think I'm a heathen because I'm telling you this and that it's different than what your religion teacher is telling you, because it's not, and I'll explain it later. Later is now. Okay? So I get to do something I don't normally get to do in science, and that is I get to talk about religion a little bit. Okay? And it's not always about your religion teacher getting to do it. So I get to do a little bit today. The point of it is that I want to explain to you why things you thought previously were mortal enemies are actually not. Okay? Those things you probably thought were mortal enemies are the creation theory and the evolutionary theory. All right? And so the way I explain it to you is the way it was explained to me. Okay? When I went to university, I stayed in residence at a place called St. Joe's College. And at St. Joe's College at that time, there was also a wing where there were where priests were staying because they were studying, working on their PhDs in theology and things like that. And I asked one of them, I said, you know, like, I'm going in to be a teacher. I'm going to be teaching science, and I know at some point I'll be working in a Catholic school, and I'm going to have to explain to kids that evolution isn't all bad, and that, you know, it's good science, and that it doesn't disagree with what's in the Bible, but I don't know how to do that. And he said to me, well, you come to the right guy, because he actually used to teach science. Okay? And so he was, you know, in the priesthood, but he had a science background. He said, this is how you explain it. He said, God was a smart guy. He is a smart guy. He knew that when he started creating everything, his creation wasn't going to be static. Okay? Static means that it wouldn't change, okay, that it would stay the same forever. He knew that. It was in, you know, in the sort of the fundamental element of his creation was that it would change. Okay, that it would be dynamic. If he wanted the things he made, if he wanted the creation he made to continue, okay, and to continue to thrive, he had to make it adaptable. All right, and so he's the one who came up with the idea of evolutionary change. Okay? He would have built it into his creation that animals, plants, anything would have the ability to adapt and change over time, because that would allow it to adapt to the changing conditions of the rest of his creation. All right? I mean, he knew that if he stuck a planet in orbit around a sun, that it was going to get hit by stuff from time to time, and that would be bad. All right? So he had to make some way for the things that he put on that earth to adapt and get through those kinds of situations. Okay? The best way to do that is to have an idea of sort of survival of the fittest. Okay? To have an organism that had some sort of adaptive ability that made it able to survive this apocalyptic event, okay, and reproduce and repopulate the earth after the fact. Okay? That's happened several times in Earth's history, okay, that we know of. Okay? Probably more than that. There's probably been minor extinction events, okay, but there have been major extinction level events, okay, in Earth's history. Right? Obviously, the most obvious one that people know about happened how long ago? 65 million years ago, okay, in what we call the KT event. All right, okay, the end of the Cretaceous period. All right, big meteor or piece of comet or something smashed into the earth off the coast of Mexico, okay, in a place called Chicxulub. All right, the village of Chicxulub. All right, just off the coast there in the Gulf of Mexico. All right, you can actually see from oceanographic sonograms that there is a crater shape, okay, in the Gulf of Mexico right off that coast, okay, marking the impact site of the Cretaceous event. And obviously when that happened, it kicked up a lot of dust and things like that into the air, and that blocked out the sun. All right, well, not completely, but pretty much for several years. So a lot of organisms died off because not only was it getting colder, but if there's less sunlight, there's also less photosynthesis, there's less stuff to eat, all right? And only things that could really scavenge and things like that would be able to survive. Okay, everybody kind of with me there? All right. Well, we've dated the oldest rocks that we are able to find. Okay, we've also dated rocks that have been brought back from the moon. Okay, and that sort of radiometric dating has allowed us to figure out how old things are. Yeah. Well, no, the amount of heat that happens makes it essentially get absorbed. Okay, yeah, quite large. Yeah, I can't remember exactly in kilometers, but I mean it was big. Okay, yeah, yeah. What's that? Well, it would when it hits. It's not like, you know, when you throw a rock at a desk and it bounces off, right? Okay. When you got that much energy and that much speed, there's a lot of heat involved. Okay, and so you get kind of a splash. That's why you get a crater shape, is because everything becomes kind of molten, right? And you get kind of a splash. That's why in the middle of a crater, there's always kind of a peak in the middle, right? Just like when you drop something into water, it makes that splash, and right in the middle, the splash comes up in the middle. Right? That's the same thing happening just with a solid. So when it gets molten like that, it just kind of cools quicker and it preserves the shape of the splash. All right, and that's kind of what a crater is. Okay. Right, the hammer that only Thor can lift. Right? Yeah. Okay. All right. So here's the other thing you need to understand. What I'm going to tell you today, all right, about sort of the order of creationism and the order of that scientifically things are believed to have happened. Okay. The way I'm going to explain that, you'll be fine with if you're not a fundamentalist. Okay? A fundamentalist is someone who takes the Bible as literal truth. Okay? If you're a person who's a fundamentalist, you will like nothing that I say today. Okay? I'm sorry about that if you are a fundamentalist. This is the way it was explained to me. Okay? And since it was explained to me this way by a Catholic priest, I think it's okay to tell it to you. All right? But if you are a fundamentalist, you won't like anything I say today, and I am sorry about that. All right, in my very Canadian way. I'm sorry about that. Sorry. Okay. All right. So in Genesis, okay, what's the order of things, guys? What happened first? Let there be lights. Okay. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty. The earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Okay? Now, that's kind of figurative for what may have happened at the very beginning of time, just the prior instant to the Big Bang. It doesn't necessarily say everything was formless. It doesn't mean there was an earth, a planet Earth, or a sun, or anything like that. It says everything was formless, right? And that's what we believe was present, okay, before the Big Bang. We don't really know exactly what was there. So we assume the universe had some formless type of existence prior to the Big Bang. Okay? And God said, let there be light. Do you suppose the Big Bang would have been pretty bright? I would think so. All right? A lot of energy would have been released at the time of the Big Bang. All right? So this would kind of make sense so far. Everything kind of goes in the same order is kind of the point I'm getting at here. Okay? And God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day and the darkness night. And there was evening and there was morning on the first day. God said, let there be an expanse between the waters to separate water from water. All right? And so we kind of go on and through this whole idea of, on this day we did this, on this day we did this. And generally, the way that science believes the universe formed, it kind of goes in the same order. What was the very last thing God made? Okay, sorry. Yeah, on the last day he rested. You're right. Okay, right before that, on the sixth day, humans. He made man on the last day. What's the last thing to evolve on Earth? Man. See, it's all going in the same order. All right? Okay, now, what you have to understand here is that at the time the Bible was written, most people were illiterate. Okay? Not just uneducated, but illiterate. So they had no understanding of complex scientific concepts. And if somebody had come along and said to them at the time, the universe is about 16 billion years old, and the Earth coalesced out of this cloud of gas and dust, and so did the sun. And when the sun kind of got big and heavy, it was heavy enough that nuclear fusion happened. They'd have thrown rocks at them until they were dead. Okay, because they'd have believed that they were cursed, okay, and that they were, spewing, heinous type of heathenistic things, and yeah, they would have stoned them. Okay, that's what stoning is, throwing rocks at someone until they're dead. All right, so they had to come up with a way to explain how everything came to be in a way that would make sense to the people at the time. All right, now, a week was kind of a sacred amount of time to people. All right, they had the Sabbath day. That's the day where you're not supposed to, do any like work, and you're supposed to just enjoy God's creation and rest, just as He did on the last day. So they said, why don't we use an analogy for all of this time? This wonderful creation that took a very long time. Didn't take 7 days. Took billions of years. Okay, but we'll compress it down and we'll tell it like a story, so that it makes more sense and people can accept it, and we don't have to spend 5 weeks explaining the idea to people. Okay, we can explain it in a few minutes in a manner that they'll understand. All right, so they said on the first day this is what happened, and then on the second day this was what happened, third day, fourth day, okay, etc. People accepted that because it was something they understood. Everybody with me there? Lots of things in the Bible are stories. Okay, they're stories that are told to explain something. It doesn't mean it exactly happened that way. Okay, but it was a way that it could be explained to people and they would understand. All right? And we accept that because we know Jesus himself spoke in parables, right? Instead of saying something exactly the way it was, he would tell a story. Right? And that was an easier way to explain things to people. All right? So that's kind of the thing we have to understand here in terms of how multicellularity evolved, because that's what we're going to go over. Okay? Understand specialization, okay, and examine the plants. Okay, we'll get to that near the end. Okay? So multicellular organisms evolved, okay, later. Multicellularity is something that's actually relatively new, geologically speaking. All right, because the first organisms were not multicellular. And in fact, it took a long time for life to even get a foothold, okay, on planet Earth, because planet Earth was a pretty rough place early on. All right, there was a lot more debris floating around in space at the time. Earth got hit a lot more often early on. Okay, so it was kind of a harsh place. All right. So this is generally the train that we scientifically believe was the process through which, okay, at least our Earth and our immediate area formed. All right, you go back about, let's say 8 or 9 billion years, and our solar system was a cloud of dust and gas. Okay, now dust can attract other dust to itself electrostatically, right? You have positive attracts negative, and things kind of come together. All right, and so you would start getting clumps of things starting to aggregate. Okay, if those clumps get big enough, they start to generate a force called gravity. All right, and this is what happened within our solar system. Now, the biggest thing in our solar system is the sun. All right, and it's the thing that formed first. It gathered all the lightest stuff because that could aggregate the most quickly. What's the lightest stuff there is? Even lighter than helium is hydrogen. Okay, that's what the sun is mostly made out of, is hydrogen. All right, so all this hydrogen kind of came together, and it got more and more dense, and it got heavier and heavier, and eventually there was so much of it, and there was so much pressure, okay, that the heat started the hydrogen fusing, and that's what ignited the sun, essentially. All right, and we say ignited, it wasn't like throwing a match on a pool of gas. Okay, it was kind of a slower process, but it's what happened, and then from there the sun kind of took off. Well, in the remaining cloud, there's not as much hydrogen now because most of it's near the sun. Okay, lots more rockier particles near the sun would start to aggregate, form the inner planets, one of which is Earth. Okay, near the outer edges there was more gas available because it wasn't all absorbed by the sun, so we have the kind of gas giants further out. All right, so let's focus on the Earth. Okay, about 4.4 billion years ago, the Earth is starting to cool enough to have a solid surface as opposed to being a molten ball. All right, it was a molten ball because early on there was lots of debris out there, okay, and it was all smashing into each other and making these rocky bodies, okay, that eventually became the planets. All right, so it was a very hot thing, but eventually as the impacts became less frequent, it cooled off. And as it cooled off, some of the gases surrounding it were able to cool, condense, and start to collect as liquid on the Earth's surface. So 4.8 billion years ago or so, okay, the Earth formed, gravity pulled everything in. Okay, 3.9 to 3.5 billion years ago, okay, life would have started to originate. Right? So we're talking here 700 million years or so between the time the Earth was actually a solid ball to when the first life may have actually originated. All right, and we say that because we only have kind of micro-paleontological evidence of it at this time. All right, now that would have been single-celled organisms, very, very primitive stuff, blue-green algae. All right, so essentially photosynthetic bacteria. All right, where would all of the life on Earth have been at this time? In water. Right, nothing on the solid part of the Earth, because the Earth's atmosphere is a lot different. Okay, at this time, it's ammonia and it's carbon dioxide and methane, right? Things that would be toxic, right, to ourselves. But if you're living in the water, you're kind of isolated from the atmosphere a bit, and you have access to different things. All right. So about 3 billion years ago or so, okay, we start getting a little bit more complex life. Now you'll notice there's this blue line running through the middle of the picture, and you can see that it gets wider and wider as time goes on. That line represents the diversity of life on Earth. So the number of different kinds of organisms, or the number of different species living on Earth at the time. Right? So you can see for a very long time it was pretty thin. Right? There weren't a lot of different things there. Right? If we scroll ahead here a little bit to 2.8 to 2.5 billion years ago, photosynthesizing bacteria are starting to pump considerably large amounts of oxygen out of the water and into the atmosphere, because the oxygen kind of bubbles and gets out of the water, starts filling up the atmosphere. This is a problem because most of the life on Earth that's there right now is adapted to living in a poisonous what we would consider a poisonous atmosphere. As the oxygen level reaches a certain point, that becomes catastrophic for much of the life on Earth, and it hits this kind of tipping point where the atmosphere goes in an entirely different way. And now most of the life on Earth dies, because now the Earth's atmosphere has become toxic to it because it's got so much oxygen and so much free nitrogen in it instead. All right, that's the first kind of mass extinction, and it was actually caused by some of the living things on Earth. Thankfully, the ones that we depend on now. All right. About 2 billion years ago, okay, we start getting oxygen continuing to build, large single-celled organisms starting to appear, and the first fossils of multicellular organisms, okay, appear at about this time level. Okay, so Earth's 4.6 billion years old. It took 2.5 billion years to develop the first primitive multicellular organisms. All right, God's a pretty patient guy. All right. Okay, remember, 7 days was an analogy for how it really happened. Okay. Yes, and that still holds true when we're talking about multicellular plants and multicellular animals. Mm-hmm. Nope. We're still talking there was an ancestral life form. Okay? When we say plants and animals, we're considering now they've already branched. Okay? We're considering here that, again, people wouldn't have understood this idea that, hey, plants, these things here that you eat are the same as you. right? And so people wouldn't have necessarily understood that. But there is a, obviously multicellular plants show up first before multicellular animals in the fossil record. So it still holds true, okay, with what we know. There certainly would have been chemoheterotrophic organisms at the time, all right, and photosynthetic ones, but not necessarily plants versus animals. Plants do come first. All right, so we get a little bit further along, okay, and you can see here that once multicellular organisms appear, we start getting this definite widening of that line, okay? Diversity really starts to pick up because there's a lot of niches, okay, to be filled. You might have heard that pronounced niche before, but it's niche. I don't know who pronounces it the other way. Okay, but so there's lots of niches, lots of jobs that need to be filled up by these organisms. So there's not a lot of competition. Everybody gets to be successful, right, for a very long period of time. Right, sorry, somebody, Wyatt, you had a question. Oh, I'm not saying it did. No, I'm not saying that. No, I'm not saying algae turns into people. Okay? I'm not saying that. I'm saying that things happen where organisms change slowly over the course of billions of years and they begin to branch. Because if you'd have tried to explain that to a person who was illiterate and uneducated, they would have thrown rocks at you until you were dead. Again, it has to be explained in a manner that could be understood and accepted, most importantly, okay, by people of the time. I'm not saying that it's a lie. I'm not saying that at all. Okay? I'm saying it's a much more efficient way of explaining something that's taking me already quite a while to explain to you, and you have a lot more background knowledge than people of that time would have had, right? Well, as the amount of times it gets hit lessened, okay? So early on, the Earth is smaller because it hasn't been hit by as many things. Because whenever it gets hit by something, more mass is added to it. They stick together, right? Okay. But as the amount of times it gets hit becomes less frequent, it starts to cool off because it's not getting pummeled all the time, right? It's like if you're hammering a nail, or you just even take a piece of wood and just hit it with a hammer. As you hit it, the wood gets hotter. Right? Well, it's the same thing with the Earth. As it gets hit, it gets hot. But if it gets hit less often, it cools. And as it cools, a lot of the stuff that was in those rocks that was being essentially ejected cools as well. And some of those things would have been like water vapor. Okay, we know from samples of meteorites and things like that that they contain water. Right? And so that stuff would have cooled, precipitated down onto the Earth's surface, and become the oceans and things like that. Right? Well, there was a layer of gas around, right, from all the ejected material, right, from all the impacts, right? I know it doesn't really show it here. In fact, it doesn't really show it in any of them. What we're showing is that the atmosphere changes and thickens over time. Yeah. No. The breaking up of the megacontinent Pangaea was because of plate tectonics. That has nothing to do with meteor impacts. That has to do with the mantle, the molten part of the Earth surrounding the core. Currents, convection currents get set up in that, right? Hot rock rises, cool rock descends, right? Same way as air. And so as that happens, as the molten rock moves against the bottom of the crust, it pushes. It pushes the crust, right? And so that could separate the plates and pull them apart. Yeah? Okay. All right, and so what you've got here then, okay, is again this widening of things. And then about 1 billion years ago, okay, we have what's called the Permian era, okay, or the Permian explosion. And that is when true kind of multicellular plants and animals start showing up, okay, complex ones. And there's this sudden explosion in diversity of types of organisms on Earth, okay? And you start seeing things like the sponges and stuff like that, okay? These are sponges here, right? You start seeing mollusks and kind of primitive animals and other types of, again, everything's still living where? In the water, okay? Life didn't really start coming out onto land until about 750 million years ago. All right? It takes almost 4 billion years for the land surface of the Earth to be colonized by even just plants. Right? It's a very barren place. Right? If there's nothing growing on it, there's no organic material. It's just rock. Okay? Rock and ice in a lot of places. It takes living organisms and erosion time to build up soil where things could live. Again, the complex animals, right? So we could say, we can look at it in two different ways. We can say the plants of the ocean, the animals of the ocean, the plants of the earth, the animals of the earth, right? Again, we can't address everything, right? We have to make, again, it's an analogy, it's not perfect, right? Because there simply isn't as much material out there now. When the Earth was forming, remember, you got this cloud of debris. So there's a lot of it out there, right? Okay, and so that caused to get hit more often. Now we don't get hit as often because there's simply not as much. When we know that, looking at things like the moon, that doesn't have an atmosphere and there's no erosion, we can see that newer craters are much less frequent than older craters. There's a lot of craters on the moon that are about the same age, right, versus less newer craters. Mm-hmm. Temperature-wise, would have been similar. Okay, would have been temperate. But in terms of would it have been hostile? No, not really. Once life was on land and starting to get green, no. In fact, we'd have had, well, not that we don't already, but had our rule of the roost. Okay, because there'd have been no large predatory animals at the time. Yeah, exactly. The only worry would have been that if you go back even, let's say, a billion years, the amount of oxygen in the air may have been less because, again, there hasn't been as much time to build up, right? No, no. Okay, there's been this constant production. Right now, there might be a little less than there has been maybe in, let's say, the last million years or so because of the amount of consumption of fossil fuels. Okay, but for the most part, it's generally always been on the upswing. Yep. All right, so now along the way here, we still do get big extinction events. Unfortunately, the thing gets so wide we don't show any of them. Okay, but at the end of the Permian era, okay, there was a big mass extinction event. All right, no one's sure exactly what because it happened so long ago that we wouldn't be able to find necessarily any crater evidence. But there are some ideas that there could have been like a supernova that happened within a few light years of Earth. Okay, and that creates a lot of radiation. Right? Even if it's that far away, a supernova is a huge explosion. Okay, and it could have, sent a lot of radiation towards the Earth and killed off a lot of organisms. Okay, and that would have set things back a little bit. And then there's this recovery time, and same as there was after the Cretaceous extinction. There's a setback and then recovery time, and so on. No, it actually happened here when there was life on Earth. Okay, the one at the end of the Permian era killed 96% of all life forms on Earth, like nearly did it in. All right, and so that would have been, there would have been a lot of recovery time after that. But because life was already there, it didn't have to completely start over. It was able to come along a lot more quickly. Right, the resources were there. It just had to get started again. Um, there wasn't really a best to be this or best to be that. It kind of just it was almost, yeah, it was almost a matter of luck. Yeah. Okay, so that's kind of where we're at with that idea there, guys. Okay. Again, we're trying to follow and kind of explain this in a way that hopefully isn't insulting anybody. Okay. Remember that evolution isn't this turns into that. Okay, it's over the course of time there are small changes to an organism, and some changes are good, some changes are bad. The changes that are good allow that organism to survive, and their offspring reproduce, and they have those same characteristics. And so slowly over the course of time, we see something changing. Right? Unfortunately, we look at it from the fossil record as this to that, and then it's an immediate jump. Okay, and it doesn't happen that way. Monkeys didn't turn into men. Okay, that didn't happen. All right, but over the course of time, ancestors may have slowly changed until they weren't recognizable as what they were before. Okay, you guys follow me there? All right. Okay. They aren't. We would be like well below floor level. Yeah, okay. Something like that. Yeah, we're the last thing. Like the best analogy I ever heard was if the entire history of the Earth was compressed into a 24-hour period, okay, humans would have appeared on Earth at 11:59:59.98. Okay, that's how like we really the only historical fossil evidence we have of like Homo sapiens on Earth only goes back maybe about 50,000 years, maybe 100,000 years. Okay, that's not very long. We consider the Earth is 4.6 billion years old, right? We're pretty recent. We're the sixth day, right? No, the moon doesn't have enough mass to retain an atmosphere, so it's dead and sterile. Now, the moon, interestingly enough, did come from the Earth. Okay? Yes, earlier on in the Earth's history, okay, before it was completely solidified, um, you have to remember that the solar system wasn't always the bodies that we know of it as. There were all these things that were coalescing. And unfortunately, near Earth's orbit, there was another about Mars-size object. Okay? So there's a Mars-size object in Earth, which wasn't quite as big as Earth is now, and they smashed into each other. Right? Because they were both still kind of molten, that created a splash effect that shot a bunch of debris out into a kind of a spiral around the Earth. Most of it fell back to the Earth. The Earth got a bit bigger, but a small amount of it coalesced and became the moon. We know this because we compared the makeup of the moon and the makeup of the Earth. Chemically, they're identical. All right? They came from each other, not as forming separate bodies. There's no way Earth could have captured the moon gravitationally. It's too big. The Earth isn't big enough. Okay? That wouldn't have happened. It would have been either a smash or a miss. Okay? And it would have swung off somewhere else. Yeah, the Earth was tidally locked to the sun. Didn't have the same rotational period. Yeah, right. So they formed together. That's also why the moon doesn't have an iron core like the Earth. The moon was made out of the surface material of the Earth because there wasn't a direct blow. It was a glancing blow. Okay, and so it shot off just the surface material, which is why the moon is so light for its size. Became the Earth and Moon. Like again, they were both molten, right? So it would be like if you I don't know how you would do this, but if you could take, 2 bottles of water maybe, and you kind of throw the liquids together, right? They merge into one liquid. That would have been kind of like that. Okay, yeah, right. So, and that's what we know. And we also know from watching this, that people have modeled this all the way back. That what we've found over the last few years is that the moon is slowly, very slowly, by about 2 centimeters a year, getting further from the Earth. Okay, so if you run that back with a computer model, it goes back to a time when they were both in the same place. Okay, and that's why we have this large impactor hypothesis about the formation of the moon. Oh, we are. But no, evolution isn't a fast process, and that's always the barrier to me explaining this to people, is that people still view this evolution just happens like that, but it doesn't. Evolution is a process that happens through natural selection. If something is successful, it produces more offspring than something that's less successful, and slowly over time we see changes. Okay? Now, because we're such a smart species, we may have stalled to some extent our own evolution, because now we have the smarts to make sure that everyone has a good chance of surviving. Right? I mean, if you go back, way back, before civilization, whatever, if you were weak or unhealthy or whatever, you died. Okay? You didn't reproduce, you just died. All right? But now, right, lots of people who even 200 years ago may not have lived long enough to have children are living full, fruitful lives. Right? Okay? Like, for example, if you were diabetic. If you were diabetic even 100 years ago, you might not have lived long enough to have children. You'd have been very sick your whole life and died very young. But now, a person who's diabetic, because of our intelligence and our technology, lives a full life and may have children, which means that they may have children who also have diabetes. So the natural selection has kind of stopped a bit for us because we're so smart we can almost overcome it. Right? For humans, yeah, I would say that. That for humans, we have kind of slowed it to an extent. All right. I mean, there's other types of Darwinism. There's social Darwinism, which is like Survivor. If you ever watch Survivor, Survivor's a great example of social Darwinism. Where I don't like you, and so I am going to not let you be in my group. That's social Darwinism. Okay. Real Darwinism is about, obviously surviving versus not surviving. That's why there's the thing called the Darwin Awards, right? You have to die to win one, because you have to die in order to eliminate the stupid gene from the pool, right? If you do something so dumb that it gets you killed, you had the stupid gene, and we award you for removing the stupid gene from the reproductive pool. Okay. Right. Why is our ancestor not also still here? Yeah, it's a good question. The evidence that we have is that actually early Homo sapiens may have actually killed off their Neanderthal ancestors, for reasons being they were competing for the same resources, right? Our Neanderthal ancestors would have needed the same food sources as we would have. Natural selection would have said, well, we're bigger, smarter, stronger, and so we're going to get rid of you. Yeah. And essentially that's kind of how natural selection works. If you're bigger and stronger, you compete better. You eat more of the food, this thing doesn't get as much food, and it dies. Right. Okay, I don't have time to get into that, Cam. Okay. Yes. Well, they're our ancestors. I mean, we still share a lot of genetic material with canines and rodents and all mammals, yeah. Like even whales. I mean, we all have similar metabolic processes, so we share a lot of genetic markers with all mammals, right? We just also have several others, right? Yeah. Not really, no. I mean, again, evolution isn't that fast. Natural selection is a slow process. It takes generations most of the time, and sometimes even thousands of years to see an even small change in something, right? Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So, a couple of things here now, guys, about multicellularity. Okay. There are some times where you get a group of cells that are working together, but they're not truly multicellular. Okay? What makes something truly multicellular is something called specialization. Right? And that is that within this organism there are groups of cells that are structurally different from others, and as a result do one job better than the rest of the cells in that organism. You guys follow me here? For example, within our body, we have cells within our lungs that are very elastic and allow the alveoli within your lungs to expand and contract and absorb oxygen into the bloodstream and things like that. Okay, they're specialized to do a certain job, whereas the cells within your bones do not. Okay, the cells within your bones are very rigid and they're designed to do different jobs and things like that. Okay, specialization is the key characteristic of all multicellular organisms. Right? There have to be differences in the cells. If you look at this organism, that is not a true multicellular organism. That is a colony of cooperating cells because all the cells are, well, and they're all identical. Okay? There isn't one that's specialized to do any particular thing. Okay? They all have the same shape. They've got this collar here with a flagellum, collar, flagellum, okay? Cell body kind of down in here. None of them is specialized to do any one thing. They all do exactly the same thing, right? And so that is a colony as opposed to a true multicellular organism. The kind of simplest multicellular animal would be the sponge. All right? If you've ever seen a real sponge, not the kind you clean with normally, okay? A real sponge is like, well, I mean, if you pick up a real sponge, it looks kind of like the synthetic kind, okay? But it's got different types of cells in it. Some are specialized for transporting material, some are specialized for catching food, some are specialized to be elastic and supportive, okay? But there's specialization even if at a very simple level. In fact, sponges are so simple. If you run them through a sieve, okay? So like push them through a screen, they'll go back together. Okay? Kind of like the Terminator, right? You go walk through the bars and then come back together on the other side. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So increasing specialization meant that organisms became more and more complex, including plants. We often sometimes have an animal-dominated view of the process of natural selection and evolution, but the same thing happened with plants. Okay, as they became more complex, they became specialized to have. Some of these cells are specialized for photosynthesis. Some of these cells are specialized for absorbing nutrients. Some of these are specialized for support. Okay, and things like that. The same process happened in plants. Right. Now you can see here, these are sort of artists' impressions. Okay, of early Earth. Look how big the moon is, okay, in these pictures here. Why is it so big? Because it's closer. Yeah, okay. And that there's an idea that that was part of how contributed a big amount to how life evolved, because life evolved in kind of the sort of tidal pools of the ocean where water came in and out periodically and supplied fresh nutrients to the area and stuff like that. Okay, these here in the bottom of this picture are what we know to be kind of some of the oldest forms of life on Earth, which is the stratoliths. Okay, they're mats of they're bacterial mats, but they're fossilized now. We find them in kind of these hexagon shapes, okay, in places. Not really coral, okay, but kind of like that. Yeah. All right, and you can see also, lots more volcanic activity. More volcanic activity because the Earth was still cooling. Crust wasn't as thick. Okay, so more stuff got through. Okay, more frequent meteor impacts, things like that. All right. Okay, so specialization here, examples of specialization within a plant, because that's going to be our example of a multicellular organism. Okay, first off, these cells are specialized because they are unspecialized, believe it or not. This is where the term stem cell came from. All right, these are parenchyma cells. They're within a plant. They can become any kind of cell the plant requires. Okay? In the same way that if we take embryonic stem cells, okay, from an embryo, okay, they are unspecialized at a very early stage. They could become any type of cell. If we catch them late enough, we can take some that are destined to become your liver. Okay? The theory goes like this: if we take those cells and put them in a culture, we could grow a whole new organ from those stem cells. Okay, you could grow. Yeah, the idea is that you could use these stem cells to grow a new liver. Here's the problem with that, though. Where are you getting those cells from? No, you're not getting them from a clone. They're embryonic. Where are you taking them from? You're taking them from an embryo. Okay, embryonic stem cells come from an embryo. Okay, which means if you took the cell from that embryo that was supposed to be its liver, what happens to the embryo? It's dead. Okay, so you have to essentially abort a fetus, okay, or an embryo in order to do embryonic stem cell type of growth. All right, that's why a lot of countries have said no, we're not going to do that. Okay, we as Catholics don't believe in using stem cells, okay, for that purpose, because we believe life begins the moment of conception. Okay, the reason we believe that is there's a good scientific reason for that. All the genetic material to build you was present right there. Okay, the potential for a person is there at that first cell. Okay, and after it gets to a certain point, you can start. If you started harvesting those cells, obviously the fetus, the embryo would die, and then we don't believe that that's right. We believe all life has value regardless of what stage of development it is at. Exactly. Yep. Yep. Again, yes. Again, that's the issue with that, is that we're valuing one life over another, right? And that's not how we as Catholics and most Christians believe, right? Now, what you can do is you can get a source of stem cells for your children if you collect the umbilical cord and the placenta. Okay. For example, my second son, we collected the placenta, okay, and it's called blood cord banking, and it's frozen in liquid nitrogen somewhere, okay. And if he ever develops any type of illnesses, or even my first son develops any type of illnesses, the chances are that we could use some of the cells from there, okay, as grafts or things like that, in order to prevent or cure certain types of ailments that could happen. All right. In that case, nothing was killed. These were the cells that were part of that are no longer part of that. Okay, you guys follow me there? All right, so that's, if you ever wondered why some people are against stem cell research, that's why. Okay, it's the price at which it comes. Right? And there are some countries in the world where they have absolutely no problem with that, okay? And they will actually do in vitro fertilization. They'll take egg and sperm, okay, that they've harvested from people. They'll fertilize them. They'll wait till it gets to a certain point and just start pulling the cells out and using them to grow things. But again, that was the potential for a human being there. Okay, that's what we believe. Not everyone agrees with that, but that's kind of the reason why we as Catholics don't believe in it. All right. Okay, so within a plant, there are these cells. Plants have them all the time, even as adults, even as mature adult plants, they have these parenchyma cells, and that's what they use to make new leaves, new stems, okay, and things like that. They just send a chemical message to a group of these parenchyma cells, and they will become a leaf, or they will become more stem, or they'll become root tissue, or whatever, all right? And so, yeah, they have those all the time. They're specialized to become anything. Okay, water conducting cells, okay, are specialized cells that are very strong, okay, and form tubes. All right, and that allows the plant to conduct water up the plant using the polar nature of water we talked about in the last unit. Okay, but they have a very kind of rigid and fixed structure that allows them to fit together in kind of a watertight fashion. Okay. All right, so you're not going to have to know necessarily all the names of these right now, but we'll talk about them later. Okay, food conducting cells. Okay, plants have two sets of tubes, believe it or not. They have a set of tubes that transport water up, and they have a set of tubes that transport sap, sugary sap, down. Okay, and those have to be structured differently. You want narrow tubes for transporting water, because if they're too wide, the polar nature of water isn't sufficient to hold it up. Sugary sap is thick. If you put it in tiny tubes, they'll get clogged. So the tubes have to be a lot wider, okay, a lot bigger. And they have to have sieve plates. Okay, you can see these things here with the kind of holes in them. That makes sure that crystals don't form in the sap. Okay, it breaks them up as the weight of the sap from above pushes down on them against these sieve plates, breaks the crystals up. Otherwise, the crystals would continue to get bigger and block the tube. All right, so we don't want that to happen either. All right, leaf structure. The leaf is the best example of specialization within the plant. Okay. Now this is a diagram you are gonna need to know. Okay, it's the structure of the leaf. We're gonna go over it a few times in this unit. Okay, but if you have your printed notes out, you do need to highlight this diagram. It's important. Okay, there's lots of specialization going on just within the leaf. Okay, the very outside cells of the leaf are called the epidermis. That's what all outside cells are called. The skin, your skin is called your epidermis as well. Okay. They don't carry out a lot of photosynthesis. In fact, they're almost transparent. They want to allow the sunlight to go right through. Their job is to secrete a waxy substance that covers the leaf called the cuticle. All right? All leaves have a waxy cuticle. You can feel it if you ever feel a leaf. They feel kind of waxy. Okay? That wax prevents water from escaping through the leaf tissue. If it didn't have that on it, leaves would dry out really quick, kind of like moss. Moss doesn't have a waxy cuticle, which is why if you put it out in the sun within like a half an hour, it's crunchy. Okay? These kind of plants can resist that because they have a waxy covering. Okay? If you've ever seen, like if you wax a car, right? What happens when the water hits it? It beads and it runs off because it can't penetrate the wax. Well, it's the same thing. Water beads and runs off of plants too. They have a waxy covering to them. Okay? Below that waxy cuticle and that epidermis are these stacked cells that you looked at in the lab. Okay? These were the ones that you drew in the cell, or you were going to draw in the cell anatomy lab. Okay? Okay? These are called the palisade cells. Okay? The palisade cells are the ones that are responsible for photosynthesis. They're tightly packed, very vertical, and full of chloroplasts. Their job is to do the bulk of the photosynthesis for the plant. Okay? So very specialized in that job. Below them is what we call the spongy layer. The cells are less rigidly shaped, and there's gaps in between them, just like in a sponge. And that layer does exactly what a sponge does. It traps water, oxygen, and carbon dioxide in order for it to be there ready for photosynthesis. All right. You've also got xylem and phloem cells. The xylem is this blue stuff here. Okay, the phloem is the red stuff. Okay, the phloem transports sugar back down to the roots because they can't make it for themselves. They're not exposed to the sun. Okay, and the blue stuff is the xylem. It brings the water up from the roots because obviously the plant's leaves can't absorb water themselves. All right, so there's these two sets of tubes running back and forth in the same way that in your body you have arteries and veins. Okay, one carries away, one carries back. And then on the bottom of the leaf, you have this epidermis again, but within the epidermis on the bottom, you have special cells called guard, or sorry, you don't, the plant does, has these special cells called guard cells. And they make up what's called a stomate, which is a hole, kind of like a pore, that can open and close in the leaf. When it's open, carbon dioxide can come in, but water vapor and oxygen get out. All right? Which is what we need for photosynthesis to occur. Okay? These cells are so specialized that as the plant loses water, they change their shape. And so when the plant has lost a lot of water, they change their shape to the point where the stomate closes off. Okay? So it's not a conscious thing, it just happens. As the plant loses water, the stomate closes, then it stops carrying out photosynthesis, and as a result, stops losing water. Okay? Usually that happens sort of near the end of the day, okay? And then overnight, the roots are able to kind of catch up with the transport of water, and these things will open up by the next morning. All right? So they're stomates. Yeah, stomata is the singular term. Stomates is the plural. All right? Yeah, so they're made up of two guard cells. A stomate is made up of two guard cells that can open and close the hole. All right, so again, very specialized types of things. And this is what it looks like under a microscope. So this is what you saw. Okay, you got a vein here. A lot of you saw those. Okay, your palisade layer, and then here's the spongy layer. They're still plant cells, but they just don't have that rigid brick-like shape. Okay, and then you can see in here that would be a stomate right there. Okay. All right. Okay, same thing, just different kind of diagram here. But again, cells have to be specialized to do a certain job. That's the keystone marker of a multicellular organism, is this specialization of the cells. All right. Yeah, so again, make sure you know those layers. I often ask about those, okay, on exams and things like that. Know the palisade layer, know the epidermis, the stomates, the spongy layer, the cuticle, okay? All of those are ways that a plant conserves water, right? And that's one of the big things we talk about in terms of plants, and what they have to do is how they preserve, conserve, and transport water. All right, so these are the guard cells, the stomates. I always ask about this, okay, how the stomate works. So put a star next to this, okay? This is how the stomate works. This is how a plant regulates its loss of water, okay? These are stomates under a light microscope, okay? You can see that the guard cells are the two sides here, okay? And they open and close, right? And then you got just your regular epidermal cells surrounding them, okay? When the plant cells are full of water, the guard cells, sorry, are full of water, the vacuoles push on them so hard that they take on a bean shape, okay? Like this. That's when the stomate is open. And this is what it looks like from the side, right? But as the cells lose water, they're not as rigid, and they don't keep that bean shape. They go together, okay? And the stomate is then closed. All right? So it's not a matter of the cell has a nervous, or the plant has a nervous system and just opens and closes these things at will. It's just a natural reaction to the fact that it loses water as it carries out photosynthesis, and it will gradually shut itself off, okay, by closing off that stomate. All right, so it's really important that we understand that process. Okay. All right. I should answer those 4 questions. Okay, we may not get a chance to go through them today, but we'll go through them tomorrow. All right.